Puri no te wharenei, puri no te whānau a topa, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. E mihi mahana kia tātou I tēnei wā, aha ko te riri o te kāwanatanga, aha ko tēnā koutou I roto I ngā tini āhuatanga o tēnei wā. He karakia o te timatanga, ka horo te marino, he whakapapa paunamu te moana, hei huarahi mā tātou I te rangi nei, aroha atu, aroha mai, tātou I a tātou katoa. I thought it would be nice to start with a karakia that talked about our environment, to kick us off in a good way. It's a great pleasure for me to come and host this Tō Mai Ora seminar. Sometimes you really have to just step out of our reality of chugging through the day-to-day things. We get up in the morning, we go to work or we go to university, we do these things, but actually a whole lot of stuff is happening. There's a secret person organizing my screenshot. But big stuff's happening in our world. Nationally, big stuff's happening to our health sector, to the range of governance that impacts on our rights as tangata whenua and tangata tiriti, and internationally for our planet. There is so much happening that should disturb and disrupt us. And so I'm really pleased to be here today to support really flash people who know much more about it than me to talk about issues in terms of planetary health. I'm just responsible for being that mean person, for telling them off when they go over time and managing the multiple questions you'll have at the end of the session. So I'm going to first of all, I think in the program, in the run sheet, whatever, we know most of these people. They're important in our important colleagues, and I will, if you don't know who they are, I suggest you Google them, because otherwise I'm going to waste so much time reading out their little bios. So I'm going to get on and ask our colleague, the fantastic Associate Professor Rhys Jones, to start off the seminar. Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora Papaarangi, o te rā tēnā tātou katoa, tēnei te mihi nunui kia koutou, e hui mai ana tēnei wā, ko wai tēnei tuaki nei, ko whakapunaki te maunga, ko te wairoa hōpupu, ho nengi mātangi rau te awa, ko Ngāti Kahungunu te iwi, ko Ngai te apatu te hapu, ko Rhys Jones, tōku ingoa. Kia ora, thank you. Very pleased to be here to have a bit of a kōrero today, and also to, I guess, share a few thoughts alongside the other panelists. I think maybe where I'll start is just by giving a little bit of an outline of how I got into this space, and some of my mahi in terms of planetary health in the broader sense. And certainly as a public health physician, I think fairly early on in my public health career, I started to work out that environments were pretty important for human well-being, and increasingly kind of looking at issues like climate change, ecological crises, and initially I think we through Ora Taiao, the New Zealand Climate and Health Council, which is a organisation of health professionals advocating for healthy, equitable, fair, tiriti-based, urgent climate action. We probably tended to approach the issue from a Western public health lens predominantly, and it's just increasingly, as I've got into this space, realising that in many ways we need to approach it from a very different paradigm, and we can't kind of keep trying to solve the problems from within the same level of consciousness that they were created within. And so really increasingly in my mahi looking towards Indigenous ways of understanding planetary health, our place in the greater scheme of things, and that then leading to what are the potential solutions for the planetary health crises that we find facing us. And so because I don't have much time, I'm just going to kind of skip to where I am with some of my current mahi. And one of the things that I have been doing for better or for worse lately is my doctorate, and still going. And that's been looking at planetary health, Indigenous health and equity, climate justice, and really trying to come at the issue from understanding climate change and the other sort of ecological planetary crises that face us as really manifestations of colonialism and capitalism. And therefore our solutions need to be rooted in different ways of thinking and decolonial approaches and Indigenous worldviews and values and knowledge systems. And really then that leading into, well, how can you apply that in practice? And some of the ways I've been thinking about that have been, one particular one recently that we've had just published is an Indigenous climate justice policy analysis tool. So trying to look at ways of addressing climate change, the climate crisis, and running them through a bit of a lens as to how do they line up with this notion of Indigenous climate justice. And I should, just to really briefly give you a sense of what I mean when I say Indigenous climate justice. And it is something that kind of recognises climate change as not just too many emissions being pumped into the atmosphere, but actually multi-generational, multi-century, extending through past, present, future kind of process that we need to attend to all the issues within that, all the justice issues, rights issues, health equity issues. And by looking at that, we understand then we need to approach justice in a way that's more than about who's, who benefits and how are the benefits and costs distributed. There are lots of other dimensions to it. There are procedural, relational, restorative, as well as distributive, and many other aspects to it that we need to think about in terms of climate justice. And the more I get into this field, the more I am stuck in this bit of a dilemma as to, right, we've got this big picture vision of what we need to do, and it's about basically smashing colonial, capitalist, white supremacist patriarchy and creating a whole different, re-indigenizing our whole society and political system and economy and etc. And I think kind of constantly stuck in this tension between we've got to work towards this real transformative future vision, but at the same time, how do we stop the worst impacts of what's happening within the current system, given that we're unlikely to do that dismantling of the current system within the next week or month or year even. And so, yeah, for me, it's about how do we try and do those two things at the same time? As Papaarangi alluded to with the current government, we kind of feel obliged to mitigate the worst impacts of the real damage that they are doing, while at the same time, recognizing that even when there's a red-flavored political party in power, there's still colonial racism going on. And so how do we tackle all those kinds of things? So yeah, the way I think about planetary health from an Indigenous perspective is very much going beyond just the environmental aspects. That's a common thing, and I think some of the others will talk about issues around ecological restoration, other environmental taiao-based initiatives. But I think about it also as extending into every aspect of life, into all the different sectors. How can we indigenize, decolonize, and really transform all our actions within all those sectors? So I think I'll leave it there for now and pose those questions and challenges and look forward to some kōrero and discussion later. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Rhys. Thank you for leading in with the simple solutions that should be done by next week. It's my great pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Christina McKerchar from Christchurch. Is that right, Christina? You're in Christchurch?
Yeah, no ana hai o Taitahi.
Kia ora. I'll leave it over to you for the next session.
Ora. O tira tēnā koutou katoa. Just really like to mihi to you in tō mai ora, especially for the editorial, the NZMJ editorial that your team all recently did. We've got it on the table at mihi down here in Taitahi and are heartened by your advocacy. But going back, I'd just like to share my screen if I can. Can people see a slide saying connecting with kai and kōrero?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay. Yeah. So by way of mihi to you, that on my left, possibly your right, is that's a photo of my mum, Ma Kuini. She's from Ngāti Porou and Kahununu. And I think that is a tray of tuna from our awa in Ruakituri. And then on the other side of the screen there is my son, Isaac. And I think he's holding up some mau from the Tairāwhiti region. So I think I was really lucky. My main area of research interest is kai, and that is how I have come to understand a little bit about sustainability and our taiao is really through my interest in kai. And I come to that from my mum. She worked for many years as a Māori dietitian, working, for Te Hotu Manawa Māori in the on kai kaupapa, and her own whānau, like my nena, for example, was a tohuna o te manaki. Manaki was what my nena and all my whānau actually love getting kai. What made me think about definitions of kai and was a project I did a wee while ago now. So I ended up thinking a lot about definitions on a project I did way back with Louise Signal in 2008, 2009. And we were meant to be doing something around enhancing food security for Māori Pacific and low-income people. And on that project, I realized that our definitions of food security are really, really different from a kaupapa Māori perspective. And that even what is conceptualized as kai is different. When in the Pākehā literature about kai, they were only thinking about food available in shops, whereas in our definitions, and I was really informed by the work of Gail Tipa, who's a Ngaitahu researcher, she was talking about mahinga kai within her definitions. So if you're able to get kai from, your mahinga kai, your eels and your kai from the moana, even your watercress, all of those kind of things, then it's not just kai from the shops. And also, in terms of the definitions about food security, and I know Madeline Schelling did an entire PhD about this, how food security is written about and conceptualized in by Pākehā academics and within the New Zealand health surveys is really, really different to how we would think about it coming from a kaupapa Māori point of view. And we would also include kai sovereignty. So food security, it can have this really, really tight definition where it pays no attention to where people are getting the kai from, whereas kai sovereignty, food sovereignty, is about the environment as well. Like it pays attention to the kai people that are eating, but also how you're growing that kai, how you're gathering that kai from the environment. So I think our definitions are really, really important, and I would tautoko what Rhys says in terms of re-indigenizing definitions. And then getting into that, I think even how we are thinking about sustainability. I know that Hemi, in his master's that he did as part of a project, really looked at I was on this project which was thinking about how can we move New Zealanders to consuming sustainable food, sustainable, healthy food. And it was a project I did with Christina McKerchar, who's a fellow researcher. And so we we did focus groups, and we did focus groups with non-Māori, and we did focus groups with Māori. And what I realized doing those focus groups is that when non-Māori think about sustainable food, they think about veganism, they think about packaging, they think about zero waste, which is all awesome things. But when we did our Māori focus groups, Māori people were conceptualizing kai in a different way, and thinking about mara, thinking about the ngahere, thinking about the moana. I think those were my 2 points that I wanted to get across, that definitions are really, really important, but also just thinking about colonization and the food in terms of what people are eating. The Pākehā colonial project was about taking whenua, chopping down the bush and putting cows on it. And say, for example, down where I live in Christchurch, Ngaitahu are currently taking the Crown to court over the management of the waterways, because the way the Crown are managing waterways means that people can't get their eels because there's way too many cows. So I think, as Rhys pointed out, this, especially in kai, it is definitely about rangatiratanga, even over land and land use. And I think Hemi, and I'm working on projects with both Hemi and Ken, so I think we'll let them, be really good to hear from them.
Christina. Over to you, Hemi. Welcome.
Kia ora, Papaarangi. Thank you for the introduction. Kia ora, Christina. I'm just going to try and share my screen. We'll see if this works out. If it doesn't. So as Christina was saying, I did a master's project for my master's in public health for advanced for training in public health medicine, exploring Māori views on kai and Aotearoa. Before I get into that, I just wanted to acknowledge my whakapapa of Ngā Pui, Ngā Ruahine and Ngā Te Ronoi, as well as my supervisors for the project, which were Christina McKerchar, Christina Clecorn. Yes, it did get confusing with 2 Christinas, Alex McMillan, and all the support that I had from Climate Health Aotearoa, from the Tangata Tiriti and Tangata Whenua caucuses. And I also wanted to acknowledge Gabrielle Baker, who did the illustrations of the native plants in this talk, as well as the contributors. So as Christina said, we went out primarily to Gisborne, Tairāwhiti, but also Wellington, and then also virtually for people working with different rōpū across the motu. And their thoughts and insights helped us to frame up this project and create this master's dissertation, which presents some of our diverse views on kai and Aotearoa, and is available to read if anybody else wants to read it, apart from my mum. I'll put the link in the chat for that. But before we went into the discussions with our key contributors, we looked at the literature, and as Christina was saying, when we think about kai, we frame it up in terms of reference to our atua, in terms of home, in terms of rongo, and in terms of our framework of thinking about sustainability, which to us is more kaitiakitanga, which means different things to different people, but is primarily around having a long-term view, being connected to our whenua, to our moana, ensuring the health of our landscapes, and that reflects the health of our people, and having guardianship, not ownership, but existing alongside our natural resources and working hard to protect, promote, improve, maintain. Within this, we also have a discussion about kai rangatiratanga, which for many of us, I feel we do not have in Aotearoa, given our current duopoly with supermarkets and cost of living and cost of food and other contextual issues. And finally, I just wanted to acknowledge the work of Margaret Mutu and Moana Jackson with the Mātiki Mai report, looking at the place of Te Tiriti in Aotearoa and its continued and ongoing relevance to us today. So in terms of our project, so after we explored the literature, and again, just acknowledging that most of these thoughts, these whakaaro, are not written down and published in scientific articles or databases, and are passed on as part of our pūrākau, as part of our oratory traditions. We explored background to this and then went out and talked with people doing the mahi on the ground in our communities. So some of the key themes that came across with thinking, reframing our approach to kai, and seeing kai as something that is Māori rich and contains a spiritual energy that connects all of us. And again, linking into rethinking sustainability and planetary health and just being more connected with the landscapes that we live on. When we talked about policies in our focus groups and key stakeholder interviews, one of our policies was talking about marakai, and I just want to acknowledge all the different hapu and iwi that are revitalising and bringing marakai to the forefront in their domains. In terms of where this sits with me, it's a little bit difficult because I am renting and living in Wellington, so I don't want to set up a mara in the backyard in case the landlord gets aggrieved and threatens to kick us out. So I think, and of course, this relies on us having our whenua and getting our whenua back. So I think mara sort of depends on our context, just depends on where we exist in time and place. But when they do exist, they are a space that we can tell our stories and connect with our atua and whānau. In terms of other whakaaro shared by our contributors that I wanted to bring to this talk today, again, I just wanted to show how we reframe and think about kai and how this is conceptually different to a Pākehā way of framing this, and how we sort of need that connection to the whenua. So when we're talking about kai, we think about it in a much more holistic approach, and we're thinking about how it impacts us and our different aspects and dimensions of our health. And again, this quote speaks to the Māori that connects us to our kai and also to our landscapes. So finally, as part of this project, we have put together this document for policymakers. Some of our key recommendations from our work was the need to recognise our right to enact kai rangatiratanga, and the fact that central government must take responsibility for creating the necessary conditions to allow us to access kai that is healthy and sustainable in Aotearoa, as well as being in relation to us and listening to us and centering our views when designing initiatives. I guess one of the questions that Rhys asked us to reflect on today was to talk about current challenges in our mahi. So I'm currently on a placement at Whāmak. So I guess current challenges for me would be remaining present in my day-to-day mahi, keeping my motivation levels up and continuing to work on our day-to-day activities, as well as focusing on my project, which is looking at how we talk about equity in our prioritisation meetings for pharmaceuticals. And I guess just having a longer term view, a lot of changes that have happened recently have been quite fast-paced. And at the end of last year, when we were sort of in the final stages of this project, we were quite excited by some political parties who seemed quite interested in taking on our recommendations and our research findings. But of course, the political environment has changed. But in future, we hope that our work will contribute to the discussion again. And in the meantime, we're just keeping on with what we can do and staying present in the space. So in terms of some of the quotes that we were reading that I didn't realize people couldn't see, so I'll just briefly read those out just to finalize. So one of them was, we use our marakai spaces to tell our stories. Another one was, the key to health is food, and every person needs to be in charge of their own health, which attaches them to a garden. Another quote was, how does it, Kai, uplift our tinana, our henenaro, our whānau? And the final thought and reflection I just wanted to share was, I know what it means, you know, to eat from your whenua. And there's a transfer of mauri there from your whenua to you, and then you carry it. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa.
Kia ora, Hemi. And a great pleasure to hand over to Dr. Ken Taiapa, our final speaker of the panel. Kia ora rā.
Kia ora te whānau, ko Ken Taiapa toko ingoa he uri, tēnei no te taira whiti ko Ngāti Parainonga whakaata, te whānau apa nui o kuiwi. Kia ora. Kia ora Papaarangi, thank you for having me along today, and it's great to connect with you and share some of my mahi in this space. How do I fit into this story? Well, it goes beyond my PhD work, but a few years ago, I did a PhD. I spent 4 years as a kaimahi working with a hapu, not my own, in Taranaki, in New Plymouth, and I was given the task of using the PhD to tell the story of a hapu marakai initiative that was developed primarily to facilitate healing after the hapu engaged with the treaty settlement system that they were locked out of. So, you know, the treaty settlement system as a crown-imposed system founded on conflict and whānau pitted against each other, and there's limited spaces at the table. So this particular hapu were locked out of the negotiations phase, and they withdrew from settlement, and they created a marakai as a healing space. And the big thing about the marakai was, and how we did the rangahau, was that rather than looking at it from traditional public health outcomes like increased physical activity, increased access to nutritional, healthy food, we looked at it from our own understandings as Indigenous people, and grounded in our relationships with our places of sustenance and belonging. So what we found through that lens was that marakai were an important way to reclaim our presence on the whenua, to remember our tikanga, our traditional practices of engaging with whenua and healing within our own concepts of creating safety through growing food. Moving forward today, I'm a research fellow at Massey at the Shaw and Whāriki Research Centre with Helen Waiwaka Barnes et al., as well as Climate Health Aotearoa at Otago University. We recently did a project last year, which was a Ngāpai o Te Maramatanga funded project, exploring the contributions of mātauranga Māori to support climate change outcomes. And the starting point for our research was some work from the late Moana Jackson, when he said that where you start the debate from determines what the debate will be about. So stripping this all back to the language that we use, and so where you start the debate from, the words that you use determines what the debate will be about and what the possible solutions are available to you. And so if we quickly use that to frame up all of our discussions about climate change, we need to remember that climate change isn't an Indigenous term, and that using a word like climate change already determines the kinds of solutions that are available to us as Indigenous people, which is primarily around reducing carbon from the atmosphere. And that might be that wide, but our Indigenous knowledge systems are more that wide. So we are forced to constrain our knowledge to fit within dominant framings of climate change. And there is a big call and recognition in the valley of Indigenous knowledge systems right now around the world, particularly by the IPCC. But again, we're forced to reconcile that to fit within dominant framings. And so what our research pointed to, after talking to Ringaropa, so Māori taiao people engaged in taiao restoration projects, as well as Māori taiao researchers, just that we need to focus on our own Indigenous concepts of wellbeing and prioritizing our knowledge and understandings of a broader agenda, particularly around colonization, health and human rights, and reclaiming our own understandings of a changing climate and how our knowledge and what our knowledge tells us about that, and how we can move forward as Indigenous people and utilizing our knowledge. But in the meantime, we're invited to to engage with climate change as a concept, so that we can talk about how we might work within that kind of framing. But beyond that, we're still yet to see proper resource and proper support being wrapped around our initiatives that are grounded in our communities. And there's lots of them happening around Aotearoa at the moment, whether they're marakai, mahinga kai, regenerative agriculture, lots of community-based initiatives that are reconnecting people to whenua, reconnecting people to taiao, and where we're seeing communities start to use that knowledge to build communities of wellbeing based on whenua connections. And so in the meantime, climate change, it does provide us with a leverage to for mātauranga approaches to come to the fore, but it still constrains our aspirations around our reconnections to place and what we can do within those kinds of relationships. And as Christina said, her and I are working on another project at the moment in the Tairawhiti. We'll be looking at the mental health impacts of climate change on kai sovereignty. So we'll be looking to build some local knowledge around what kind of impacts climate change is having on kai sovereignty, and particularly in the mental health space with kai growers in the Tairawhiti region, where her and I both whakapapa from. And we've had really good support from the communities over there, because we're looking to employ local community researchers to train and employ them to collect the data, and we'll work with them to analyse and interpret the data. And yeah, that's enough from me. Kia ora.
Hey, thanks, Ken. That was fantastic. So I'm going to ask Rhys to come back up here, and so then you can see his face on screen, and we're going to have some questions. We got given a few questions. Yep. We got given a few questions, but I thought I'd start off by, and possibly we're speaking to the converted, but you know, one of the things that people ask us all the time is, what can we do? So I know that we need the big system structural whatever change, but in your areas of expertise, what do you say to people when they ask, what can we do?
Am I going first? Okay, might as well. Yeah, I always find that a challenging question, because I think a lot of people go to the response of kind of thinking about individual lifestyle changes and things that you can do to kind of be more sustainable, and you know, and there's certainly, you know, some validity to that. Eating less red meat and more plant-based foods, you know, traveling less by fossil fueled vehicles, all those sorts of things are really important. But what I would say is that, yeah, the challenges that we're facing and the sort of ecological crises are not due to individual lifestyle choices. They are due to those big systems and structures and forces that are, you know, pushing us in the direction of extraction and pollution and planetary health crises. And so I think the value, I think, of that individual level action is that it creates the momentum and sort of impetus for those big system changes, and for people to see themselves as creating that, or helping to create that change. And so I think there's a real value in things like actually just reconnecting with nature in whatever way that works for you and whatever that means for you. One of the key things that I think about in terms of climate change and other crises is that when you boil it back, you know, when you strip it back, it's about disruption of these essential relationships that we have with the land and with all our other relatives, human and more than human. And so part of the solution is actually beginning to restore those relationships, that separation of man and environment, or humanity, sorry about the gendered language, a humanity and environment that's kind of a feature of colonialism and modernity, you know, is I think something that we need to really deconstruct in our own mind first, and, you know, reconnect before rippling that out and creating the wider changes. And so, yeah, I think for me it's about, and the other thing I would say is because climate change and those other things are really symptoms of colonialism, capitalism, anything that we can do to disrupt colonialism and capitalism, to practice in decolonial ways, is going to be part of a climate solution. So whether that's Indigenous language revitalisation, thinking about your own workplace and the ways in which colonial thinking, values, structures are playing out and trying to dismantle those, any of those sorts of things, I think, will point us towards planetary health solutions. Kia ora.
Others online? Others online got burning things that you tell people?
Kia ora. Kia ora, Rhys. Yeah, tautoko, especially your sentiments around reconnecting to whenua or reconnecting to taiao, because if colonisation is predicated on separating us from our environments, then reconnecting is always a wonderful thing. Me, coming from my own personal bias, when people ask me, what are we going to do, Ken? I'm like, well, plant a garden, grow some food. And even if you're not able to grow, if you don't have space to grow food wherever you're living, find a community of learning, a community of growers, a community of people that are committed to change, because there's lots, whether they're Papaarangi-based, Marakai, community gardens, there's lots of things going on, and there's usually really inspirational kōrero happening there, people committed to change, people resisting and reclaiming and looking to create healthier lifestyles. Kia ora.
Yeah, I just want to tautoko what's been said. I think for me, something really important is continuing to talk about it and continuing this narrative, and just making sure that we're reframing and having different voices in this debate, particularly around the framing of climate change and how that's typically been framed from a non-Indigenous perspective, with power differentials in that discussion. I mean, at my workplace, we have a sustainability advisory group. So something I've been talking internally about is our focus and trying to make it a little bit broader than carbon offsets, and also thinking about the ways that we might have been set up as an advisory group instead of a group that could maybe do more and have more power in the space. So I guess just being aware of that and maybe trying to challenge and push that in our workspaces. Otherwise, in terms of the here and now, I think for me, it's important for us to focus on our mental health, given all of the everything that's sort of happened in the past 18 months, and just making sure that we're prioritizing our own personal well-being and that of our whānau as well, and trying to do what we can. But equally, I acknowledge all the important things people do day to day, but I think it is going to take collective action and good policy that helps to rebuild the environments that we live in. I mean, that's something I really appreciate about Wellington, is that it is a walkable city, so that, I can walk to work, but I understand that's a privilege that's quite unheard of in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So something I guess I'm hoping for in the future is, challenging our thinking about how we design our environments to support sustainability.
Christina's not jumping in, so I'm going to ask another question. And it really relates to our roles in universities and our roles as educators. So it came through questions in the registration. How can we as educators role model planetary health? There was a further part of the question which was about how nurses lead the world, but I've left that bit out, just in balance in the whole of the faculty. But, how do we in an education system like this really bring planetary health into our practice as educators?
I think there's a whole question and process going on around this within health professional education, and I see other people who are working on a sustainability curriculum within our programs here. And I think, part of the answer, I think, is, as someone said earlier, someone said just to keep talking about it, and to actually think about how planetary health can be integrated into whatever mahi we're doing. And so I think for me, that's about really understanding the whole kind of notion around planetary health being that you can't understand and address human well-being without, also understanding the health of our taiao, health of our ecosystems, etc., and planet. And so I think within a health professional context, that can be difficult sometimes because of the sort of urgency and immediacy of clinical healthcare often. But I think it's always important to think about what are the connections to broader planetary health issues, and how can we actually accentuate and bring those into our everyday healthcare practice.
Anyone else on the panel want to contribute? Christina, I see your mic's turned on. Great.
Kia ora. Every so often, we teach the fourth year medical students who are in the Ōtautahi campus about public health, and as part of that, they do a little bit on sustainability, and they have to do advocacy presentations where we teach them how to advocate, and sometimes they choose sustainability as the kaupapa, and it's been really interesting listening to their ideas over the years, usually around waste on the wards, and some of the other ideas they've come up with have been somewhat focusing on one tiny thing rather than the broader kaupapa. But I think, it's been interesting listening to them as their ideas with that particular generation of rangatahi.
Kia ora. I tautoko what you both said. I also think as Māori academics and researchers that we need to support each other and continue to advance our knowledge and understanding on Indigenous concepts of taiao, hauora, planetary health, and because Rhys has supported me with developing other projects, and I've worked with Christina to develop other projects, and I think it's an exciting time to keep pressing on that boundary and creating new knowledge of what that stuff means for us as Indigenous people. Kia ora.
Yeah, I want to pick that up a little bit, Ken, because another question came in from the registrations, which is how can we resolve the perceived conflicts and foster synergy between, they use the word conventional science, I'll say westernised science, and mātauranga Māori. So that seems to be a space all of you are in, and I'm just wondering how you get on dealing with the tension between those two domains.
I really want to mihi to the work of Hannah Burgess and Hayley Karoi. And my, I did undergraduate nutrition, and Hayley and Hannah did a beautiful think piece, intergenerational intimacies, sort of reconceptualizing kai. And within that thinking, they talked about the science of nutrition and how actually is a little bit, quite a lot colonial, which was really challenging for me given my undergrad training. So for me, the reading and the thinking and the redefining and the re-indigenizing has been really important. Going back to what Ken sort of talked about, how we are thinking about it then determines what you do. I think there's some amazing thinkers in the Mātauranga Māori, and so for me, it's been reading and thinking.
I'd agree, Christina, and I think I would add that I think actually, certainly as I was getting into climate change and health and addressing planetary health, there's a certain extent to which I think Western science is actually helpful and can get us part of the way to where we need to go. And one of the things that struck me is that colonial governments and many other decision-making leaders and things around the world were ignoring even the Western science in terms of climate change, and that sort of level of knowledge from Western scientific systems was pretty compelling in terms of what we needed to do to address the climate crisis at one level. And I think what Indigenous or Mātauranga Māori and Indigenous knowledge systems offer is a very different perspective on how we can, I guess, get to similar sorts of ends, but thinking about it from very different ways, and really centering different kind of relationships, different values, and in many ways, I think helping to solve many other problems as well, as not just climate change, but also helping to tackle a lot of the other challenges and crises that are really based on colonialism and capitalism.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And I would just encourage people to maybe not think about these things in binaries, but understanding when which approach is most useful for whatever context that we're working in and the people that we're working with. And but most definitely, all I can speak to that, I can only speak to that as a Māori researcher, and that, you know, I have a commitment to re-indigenizing our relationships to whenua, and science can be a wonderful tool when balanced with our own understandings and our own epistemologies. Kia ora.
Of course, I want to get to the politics of it all now. And, you know, another question came in that I'm going to reflect on, which was really about what do we do when some of our leaders take us in the opposite direction, or in terms of their policies and thinking. And of course, it's not just nationally, but it's internationally, where colonialism is still active in the Pacific with Kanaki in Western Papua, and of course more broadly in the various colonial wars happening from Palestine through to the Ukraine. So what do we do when we're helpless, in inverted rabbit's ears, I would say, when the machine is continuing in a very destructive way, despite the evidence, and whether it be at a national level or at an international level, wreaking havoc with our good work? This is the last question, so give it heaps.
Yeah, maybe I can try and answer that very quickly, or start off at least. And I think yeah, part of the way we've come to approach this whole area has been to, I think, you know, sort of wait for the opportunities when they arise and try and be ready to take advantage of those. And I think certainly at this current time, you know, the opportunities aren't very many, and don't come around very often. But I think in terms of how we tackle this, you know, very problematic and destructive kind of political forces that we have at the moment, particularly here in Aotearoa, I would say that it is about kind of organising, and it's about all of us who are kind of working in different silos, different areas, not just within health, obviously, but in a much broader sense, working on any of these issues that kind of tie together, whether that be climate justice, other decolonial issues, you know, public health. Across the board, I think it won't be until we kind of come together and develop some sort of shared opposition to the, you know, really challenging political environment that we're in, and really push back against the politicians, but also the bigger interests that are behind our politicians and forcing us in the wrong direction. So, yeah, we'll go to Hemi.
I think for me, this current environment has made me acutely aware of my sort of sphere of influence, and just trying to be present in the space, and also looking at the levers that I can pull and the things that are sort of beyond my control. I think for me, something I've realized about this is that I miss working in general practice and having that connection with people in the community and having those conversations with people face to face. So I think that's really important, and, you know, staying connected, continuing this discussion. If this isn't something that we can further in our own personal work, thinking about our sphere of influence with whānau and outside of work, and seeing what we can progress there in the meantime.
I think the rangatiratanga conversations that te ao Māori are currently having are really, really important. Tomorrow at Tuahiwi Marae, where they are hosting, Ngaitahu are hosting the Hui a Motu that started at the Kingitanga, and I'm meeting Tania Huria and Sue Petam at 6:45 a.m. in the morning, because and we're helping out at that hui. So yeah, so those conversations I think are so important, because I think where I landed at the end of my PhD, and my PhD was a little bit about food availability for tamariki Māori, was around policy and who gets to write the policy and who's in charge of the policy, and realizing most of policy with the possible exception of the whānau water policy, is all written by Pākehā for Pākehā as a general rule. So I think those, those conversations started by Moana with Mātiki Mai are just, and the lawyers with He Puapua are really, really important. But in the meantime, I can, go and help out with the Kohaka or Tū Haitara Trust planting a biodiversity mode around the corner from my house.
Well done.
Kia ora, Christina. Can I just add to that? I think yeah, the sort of kotahitanga, the sort of Māori movement that's building, I guess, in opposition to this current government. One thing I would say is that we really also need that to extend to tauiwi, to non-Māori, to support those kinds of movements if we're going to get real change in terms of political direction.
Oh, wow. Who would have thought it's ended up in a political statement? But as I think Christina said, food is political and health is political. So I want to thank you all for coming today and showing your interest. We will try and get Hemi slides to be made available to people. And just want you to join me in thanking everybody for the speakers on the panel. I'm going to finish with a little karakia, which we can all join in. Haki roto, breathe in. Haki waho, kia tau te mauri e kōkiri nei, or you can keep breathing. I ngā piki me ngā heke, ko te rangi Māori, tāku e rapu nei, tihai mauri ora. Tēnā koutou katoa.